This is a useful photo because it shows actually quite nicely one of our very first geophysics field seasons. Actually, I can see in the background we were also doing excavation at the same time. But we've got volunteers in the picture and we've got students in the picture. So we've worked with all sorts of people to do our geophysics surveys. Students from Bournemouth University, students from Exeter, volunteers, students from elsewhere. And slowly over time, we've managed to cover quite a large area of the landscape. So back to this map, you can see where the Valley of Stones is. And what I'm going to show you now, we're going to look at Tennant's Hill first, and then we'll come down and look at the Grey Mare and her coals here. So you can see we're only a couple of kilometres away from the Valley of Stones. This is where all those sarsen boulders are, down here in the middle of the Valley of Stones. And they've been taken to build the prehistoric monuments of the Stone Circle and the Grey Mare and her cults. The Grey Mare is a long barrow. Now, this black and white image is an image taken using infrared from a drone, which we commissioned, and it's the most helpful survey for showing a slightly wider landscape. So the Stone Circle is this circle closest to the bottom of the image. And this is, for those of you who've been there, this is a trackway that runs along the top. This is basically the top of the ridge, and then the hill slopes down from either side. This is the Stone Circle. It's a scheduled monument that was already known about before we started work. This circle here, you can just about make out inside that circle is a raised area. That's a Bronze Age round barrow. That's scheduled. So we knew about that before we started working in the field. Over on the left-hand side is a really strong pimple showing up. That's another really extant Bronze Age round barrow. And in this red circle, the circle closest to the top of the picture, is a enclosure site. The date of that is unclear, but I think it's probably late Bronze Age. And we've been able to infer some things about this site through the results of our various surveys. Now, the yellow circle furthest to the left is our excavation area where we've excavated previously, where we found some roundhouses and some formations. And the other circles are surveying small bumps that showed up on the survey. They're just about perceptible when you're standing on the ground. But if you look at that photo of the Stone Circle, it mostly looks like a very flat field. And so we've been doing geophysics to work as a complementary method to help us understand those really low features. There's a bit of background in response to the question that I was just asked. This field was obviously used quite a lot in prehistory, but it wasn't used again for agriculture, we don't think, until after World War II. So when you look at the early Ordnance Survey maps, it was all covered in scrub. It was considered to be rough land. It wasn't ploughed at all. Which is why the prehistory has preserved really quite well. And it possibly explains why nobody else has used it for anything else. It's on top of a hill, it's rather exposed, it gets very foggy and misty and cold up there, even on the best summer's days. And then when the sun really comes out, you basically bake up there. Many of our existing volunteers have experienced the weather, and it's exhausting, so it could be worse. But if I wanted to live somewhere, I would be living down in the valleys rather than up on the top there. And that might be part of the reason why no one else has been up there, basically, because it's a bit hostile, and it was just allowed to become scrub after prehistory. So this image is our magnetometry results. Now, I've already indicated that magnetometry is not the most successful method that we've been using. You can see the stone circle is where I put this circle at towards the lower end of the image. The higher pinkish circle is that other scheduled barrow. Anybody see any other features in there that look like there might be archaeology? Anybody see anything at all? I'm aware that the image will be quite small on your screens, and probably quite hard to see. So you can look at it in greater detail when I send the PDFs around. You might find it easier to zoom in then.
So what are the lighter splodges, Hayley?
The lighter splodges. So what we've actually got going on, the lighter. So this survey was undertaken over several different seasons with different groups of students, with volunteers mixed in, and the lighter splodges are where you've, in theory, got less remnant magnetism. However, most of those lighter splodges, the really pale ones, are right next to some really darker splodges. And those big blobby splodges, so I don't know if those of you can see my cursor, these big splodges here, these really dark ones, they've got the lighter patches next to them. And I think the lighter patches are sort of like a reaction to the really dark splodges. And those really dark splodges are actually geological. Up on Tennant's Hill, the geology is not dissimilar to Bronkham Hill, for those of you who know that, where you get those big sinkholes.
Right.
And they fill up with ferrous materials. There's quite a lot of the soils are iron rich, and you basically get these big pockets of iron rich soils, which of course show up really strongly for the magnetometer, and that mostly disguises all the archaeology that's sitting on top of it. Those geological signals are just too strong to allow us to filter off the archaeology. Now, if you look to the left-hand side of the image, you can, I'm using my cursor for those of you can see it, but there are sort of 5 splodges in a bit of a semicircle shape.
Yes.
When we first did this survey, we did this before we'd done any excavation at all. And we spotted those. We thought, oh, they're in a circular shape. That's interesting. Let's excavate there. We thought there'd be large pits. They're not. They are also geological. And that's where we found the roundhouse. So we found lots, when we excavated, we found lots of small post holes, which you cannot see on the magnetometry survey at all. You can make out sort of in the middle of the image, towards the top of it, is this oval feature here, where there is, in a way, it's easier to see because you haven't got any of those geological splodges, but you can kind of make out this slightly paler area of sort of slightly paler oval ring. That's got a lower remnant magnetism, and that is actually, we now know, a long barrow site. So we have excavated that since we did this survey, but it's really not very obvious to see. And if you can remember the long barrow surveys that I showed you, the one by Maiden Castle and the one on Sheepdown, they also didn't show up particularly clearly on the magnetometry survey. So really, it's a bit of an unfair question of me to ask you what you can see, because you can't really see very much. To zoom in a bit on the stone circle, the red dots are the stones themselves. You've got some really strong signals there with really black circles in the middle with white on the outside. They are actually bits of metal in the ground. So again, there's no features really identifiable with the stone circle itself, apart from those three strong signals, one of which we now know is wire that's been put to protect the stone from where the rabbits would kind of burrow underneath it. I think that's the one on the western side, the one on the left-hand side, sorry. And the one on the right-hand side is where historic England used to have a signboard. And the footings of the board are still there, even though they moved the sign, they didn't take the footings out. So that gave us a really strong metal signal. And right in the middle, we suspect, is where there's been the odd fire. Stone circles are quite popular for people to go and celebrate in modern times as well as in prehistory. And we suspect there was a little bit of naughty business happening there. But again, we've got evidence of things happening in the past, not things happening in prehistory though. And in fact, if those stones weren't there at all, you might not even notice that was an archaeological site on this survey. So, shows my label.
Interest. Oh, sorry. Just saying, interesting in that photograph, that track doesn't appear, does it?
Nope. The tracks don't appear, the footpaths don't appear, very little appears. No, so magnetometry, we have concluded, is in that particular field is just not the best technique to use.
So have you overlaid that with another survey to see what else would appear with another method?
I have. Here you go, resistivity. So resistivity is very slow, so we didn't use it at first because it seemed like we had quite a big area to cover. And as archaeologists, traditionally you go for magnetometry first, so that's what we did. And when it didn't really work, and when we excavated and then found things that weren't on the survey, we thought we needed to try again. So we started with the resistivity. Now this survey isn't as complete. Again, it's been done by different people over time, and so this image isn't quite as aesthetic as I would like it to be. I need to spend a bit more time playing around with the data to match it all up. But you can see, actually, there's a lot more visible. Now, I know looking at these images is a bit like looking at an X-ray, where you kind of have to get your eye in and it takes a while and it all looks like it's some black and white blurs at first, but hopefully we can work through it together a bit. So the long barrow, the arrows pointing to it here, shows up much more clearly. You've got an area of an oval shape of lower resistance coming round here, and on the inside of that you've got a secondary ditch of lower resistance. Now we've excavated this since this survey was done, and yes, we proved that it's a long barrow with two ditches around it, which is quite unusual. In the Neolithic, they normally have, like I showed you on the earlier long barrows, a ditch flanking either side. This looks like it's got a ditch flanking, but then at some later point they dug a much bigger ditch all the way around the outside of it. So that was quite a good result from our resistivity survey. Now, you were just asking me about the tractor tracks and the footpaths. They do show up on the resistivity survey, running parallel to this this modern, the green dotted line is the footpath, or the track that runs along the side of the field. That track is so terrible that even the tractors don't bother to use it, and they run up and down the edge of the field, and you can see where they've compacted the ground down and produced these linear features here. This is a round barrow. We'd identified it using that infrared survey, and the resistivity does show definitely that there is a feature here. it does look like it's low resistance in the middle, which is curious, because it means that whatever that mound has been built up with hasn't become too compacted, and it's probably organic, and it's retaining the moisture in some way compared to the soils on either side, which is interesting. And we're also starting to see prehistoric linear features. So we're starting to see the field boundaries coming through. These are probably dating to the later Bronze Age, but you've got one linear coming through here. Hopefully you can make that out. It's in the, for those of you who can't see my cursor, I'm looking, how to describe that? At the very top of the image, you've got 4 squares. On the right-hand side, the top square, the feature starts, and it kind of cuts into the square beneath that, and then into the one southwest of that, to the down and to the left. And you can make out it's a dark feature. It's not a very strong signal, but it is certainly there. There's another one that runs parallel to that. It actually comes past this long barrow. And I haven't got an image to show you now, but when you look at this in relation to the aerial photographs and the infrared surveys, you can see that these are definitely prehistoric field boundaries, because they're fitting into a much bigger picture. The whole landscape is covered in these field boundaries, and this fits nicely into it. However, they don't show up on any of the other aerial photos. No one really knew about them before we'd done this survey. We probably would have guessed that they'd be here, but we couldn't actually prove it.
There looks to be another feature right at the very edge of the survey, the top. Yeah.
Up here.
Yeah.
I think so that could be another field boundary, but it's also quite close to the modern hedge. And my guess would be that you've got some kind of modern interference going on from the hedge. I mean, maybe there's a barbed wire fence just off here somewhere, possibly. But yeah, you're quite right. You can see there, you're getting your eye in, you're starting to look for those repeating patterns, basically.
You highlighted that long barrow on the right hand side, but you can always maybe just see things, but to the left of that there seems to be another 1 and 2 circles, or part circles
to the left, sort of over here somewhere.
Yeah, but there, exactly where your cursor is, there's one there, and another shadow just north of where that round barrow is. There's like a circular shadow to the left a bit.
Somewhere over here. Yeah. I mean, you could say something around here as well. It's
but they seem stronger readings than the long barrow one that you've highlighted.
They do, and I think that's actually an error. Not an error, because the surveys were done on different times and different years. They haven't got the same background reading, and I need to spend a bit more time trying to make them match up, basically. In fact, if you look, you can see where the survey was done. There's like quite a clear difference in just how the survey generally looks here compared to over here. I think that's a bit of processing. We need to spend, if any volunteers want to spend some time doing it, playing around with the data, smoothing it out, making it all match up a little bit better. The thing with the data is that you do need to play around with it. You get these images printed out and you can't see anything sometimes. And I'll show you with another survey in a minute how you need to manipulate things sometimes to allow those different distinctions to come out. You can imagine if you've got a really, really strong signal, because everything is relative, that really strong signal will dominate and make it harder to see less strong features. So sometimes you might want to chop that out altogether. to enable you to look at other things. And I think we've got a little bit of that going on. I need to spend a bit more time just matching things up and playing around with it. But they could well be features. We also, in an ideal world, would do a little bit more surveying in this field. You know, come and do this bit just to the north of the Long Barrow. That would be lovely to just do that bit and see it. This prehistoric field boundary, we think it's running past the Long Barrow. In fact, I'm just going to skip back to this image here. We think it's running past down here, past the Long Barrow. That's this yellow circle, towards this enclosure. And it's possible that there's another one coming the other side of the Long Barrow as well. And we have a current working theory that the Long Barrow was actually flattened when those features were created and dug. So they decided they weren't using the Long Barrow anymore. It had been flattened, and they then wanted to move their cattle essentially through this field system down to this enclosure at the top. We would love to do some more surveys to fill in the gaps. However, the farm is currently up for sale. And of course, we need landowner consent. So we just need to wait and see whether we can get back in there or not. I'd love to complete this little square here at some point. And there's a little bit more down here. So in fact, if I show you, we have done the stone circle. I tell you what, this stone circle image, you can see there's a problem with the data again. This was one of the very first ones we did. We had some students who were really great. They came out and did the work for us, and then they took the data away, and we never actually saw the raw data again. And we've only got these images that they gave to us, which are problematic, and that's partly why I've not put it in with the other images, because it's even worse matching stuff up than it is with that Long Barrow. Now, we've spent a while trying to work out what's going on here. You've got a really clear distinction halfway across the stone circle. We don't really have any answers as to what that is. It looks like it's real, no matter how badly the data was collected or processed, and it wasn't badly collected or processed really. It looks like you've got something really obvious going on there. It's low resistance, which means it's a bit more, contains a bit more moisture. But we don't really have any answers to that, which probably isn't what you want me to hear me say. But the stone circle is scheduled, which means, again, to go back and redo that survey, we need to reapply for permission. And there's no chance we can excavate it at the moment. We absolutely would have to ask for permission to do that. It's very unlikely they would grant it to us. But it's a very curious survey, that basically. And I'm afraid there's not a huge amount more that I can say on that, other than that, if the sale happens for the farm, if the new owner is very happy, then maybe we will apply for permission to do the survey again. But it takes quite a lot of time and effort to apply for these permissions, and we're not going to do it until we definitely know the landowner's fully on board. And as you'll see, I'll show you in a minute, there's quite a lot else in the landscape to keep us busy. So moving on. So I just wanted, for those of you who aren't familiar with the landscape, to just say this is where we were at the images I was just showing you. Tennant's Hill and the Kingston Russell Stone Circle are up here. This is the Valley of Stones where we're sort of inspecting everything from. And now I'm going to go and look at the grey mare and her colts. which is down here. This is Galwell Farm, just at the bottom here. Galwell Farm own the land for the grey mare and her colts. And they're not selling, and they're very enthusiastic and very keen for us to do lots more work on their land, which is great. Earlier this year, we did manage to get permission to do surveys over the grey mare and her colts and the rest of the field. The grey mare is another long barrow. You can see in the photo that it's got these great big sarsen stones that make up the facade at the front of it, and it's got this nice elongated oval mound behind them. The other long barrows that we've looked at, the one we've excavated and the one on Tennant's Hill I just showed you, doesn't appear to have any stones in it anymore. The ones that I showed you near Maiden Castle and on Sheepdown, they look like they've got some really strong stone signals. There's obviously some stone in the grey mare and her colts in this photo building up that facade, and there's obviously a few more loitering around in the background. We wanted to know a bit more about it. Is there a stone chamber tomb in there, or is there not? Is it an earthen mound? And rather than just surveying just the monument, we wanted to do the whole field. We did this with magnetometry. Now, again, magnetometry is a great tool. We've been able to identify more through this than we have done on Tennant's Hill, although it's still a little bit limited. Now, this is an image. The survey was done partly with volunteers, in fact, entirely with volunteers, but who were led by a colleague of ours called Dave Durkin. And he's obviously much better at this than we were on Tennant's Hill. But I also think there's an element that geology is behaving itself a little bit more. The image is still not easy to interpret, which is why I've put his interpretation to the right. Now, the grey mare actually is being cut out of here. And I think this image needs updating to include that, but he hasn't quite finished processing it. Because of the way in which things work, we had to do half the survey and then come back and do the actual monument itself once we'd got permissions come through. So it was done in this was also done in multiple stages, but in a much closer timescale. And this is the grey mare up here to the north of the picture. And he's identified 3 possible pits up the top. They're really hard to see at this scale, I'm afraid, especially if you're looking on tablet or a phone. But interestingly, if you come down to the middle of the image, you can make out a round barrow here. Now, this was also known about because it was scheduled, but just to the northwest of it, you'll have to squint a bit, but there is another circular feature. On his interpretation map, I've labelled it as C2. And then you've got all these other little tiny features, all these little dots he thinks are pits. And they're in quite an alignment. When you start to look at it, you've got a line of them coming through here. And then actually these ones, you can't really see the dots on the PowerPoint, and the numbers aren't in line, so it's harder to identify, but it does look like there's another linear line arrangement coming through here. You've got some big areas of what he thinks is fairly modern disturbance at the top and down at the bottom. You can see along this boundary here. In fact, that's not the boundary. This is the boundary. This is where the road comes down. It's not quite the edge of the field, so that's curious. But I also know that geology changes a bit as you get towards the south of the field, so that might influence some of these things. And the other thing to point out is these square shapes here, 2 rectangular shapes next to each other. Now they are just, hopefully you can see my cursor, where they've gone here. That's them there. Now, they're not easy to see. I probably would never have spotted them, but Dave is super good at this. And that is what we're hoping to go and investigate further with some resistivity survey next week. So that's our plan. Now, square features are not normally prehistoric. So there's a bit of me that's kind of wondering maybe we're going to come across our first non-prehistoric site up in this, up on the top of the hill in this landscape. That might please some of you. It might not please some of you. Maybe they are prehistoric. We hope to also capture this this second circular feature next to the barrow, and maybe some of these pits as well. So it might, hopefully, we can have a nice complementary survey to the magnetometry. We've done resistivity over the scheduled barrow, because we had to get permission to do. We applied for that permission at the same time as the grey mare and her colt, so we just had to get that done really quickly. And we could only focus on that barrow. I didn't have time to expand beyond it. Now, interestingly, to the south and west of the barrow, looks like there's another possible circular feature coming through. But just to go back to the previous image, that didn't show up on the magnetometry at all. You've only got one to the northeast. Now either something's got a bit twisted round, which seems unlikely, or we've got other features that are showing up with the resistivity and not the magnetometry. So that's our plan for next week. Hopefully that will capture some of your interests. Sorry, I'm just going back to my notes to see what else I've forgotten. When we applied for permissions to do the grey mare and her colts, we did manage to do some resistivity on it, which is good news. But we only managed to do this top area of the field. And it's really interesting to compare this to the long barrow I was just showing you on Tennant's Hill, and to the long barrows on Sheepdown and at Maiden Castle. Now, there are lots of different images on here because we've had to play around with the data. If you look at image C on the right-hand side down at the very bottom, you can see it's really, you've got some really strong areas there of low resistance in the middle of the barrow, and we do think that they may well be stones that are building up, excuse me, the a chamber 2. Another option is that they are holes dug by antiquarians that were then backfilled. But it's really interesting. They match up really nicely. If you look at image B in the middle, with all the yellow lines on it, that's a plan of the site. So those lines all show the breaks of slope. The orange shapes are the stones, the sarsen stones. You can see the facade at the front, the ones that are visible. But then the breaks of slope really do quite nicely match up with those resistivity results, which is fascinating. It's very different to the long barrow on Tennant's Hill, and different again to the ones at Maiden Castle and Sheepdown. The ones at Maiden Castle, if you remember, they basically had areas of high resistance just at the front. This has got a second area towards the back. So this is really interesting. In the Neolithic, when they were using these long barrows, they didn't just bury people like we do today. They would, sorry, this is a hard topic for me to talk about at the moment. basically they had all different methods of burying people, and they didn't just, a person didn't die and they didn't just get buried. They went through all sorts of different processes. And they would curate the dead. They might actually finally deposit the bones 200 years after the person originally died. There's evidence in some chamber tombs that they would organize the bones. So you get all the long bones in one area, you would get all the skulls in another area. They did all sorts of different things and had a very different relationship to death than we do today. And it's absolutely fascinating to look at this long barrow and to start thinking about what those different, those strong stone signals might mean. Are they capstones for chambers? What's unfortunately quite frustrating is we probably won't ever fully know. Partly because all the soils up in this landscape are quite acidic, as well as being quite ferrous, they're quite acidic. And we very rarely have found any bits of bone at all. So even if we were able to excavate this, it would be quite a challenging excavation. And we might not find the bones themselves anyway. The site's scheduled, the chances are we'll never get permission to dig it. We do have a dream of excavating around it. But for now, we need to content ourselves with the geophysical survey, looking at the Braemere and the area around it, but also just coming back to here, coming and looking lower down this field, I think is going to be really interesting next week. I'm actually fascinated to find out what this feature is, these rectangular features. And my colleague was out there last week and she went to have a look, and she's laid out our grid so that we can go out and do the survey. And she says it's flat. She says the area there is flat. She wouldn't have spotted it if she hadn't gone deliberately looking for it. But I'm pretty sure there's something there. So hopefully we will find out more. Now, there's a reading list which you don't really want to read now. But I will make sure that's included when I send you the slides around later. And hopefully a link to the recording. Does anybody else have any questions on any of that? I'm just going to stop sharing so you can hopefully see my face again. I've thrown quite a lot of information at you. We've been sat here for a lot longer than I'd intended. Sorry about that. Hopefully.
A lot of the stones have actually been messed around with over the centuries by various people, haven't they? Victorians and Georgians.
They have. They have. The Grey Mare, there is, I think it's one sentence or two sentences in a text somewhere that says an antiquarian had a look, and that's all we know. We don't know whether they found anything. We don't know exactly what they did. It's possible that some of those changes in resistance are actually evidence of an antiquarian trench. But we don't know any more than that, unfortunately. The stone circle on Tennant's Hill, we know that's been added to over the years. Yeah.
Were those stones that were standing up?
Probably, possibly. They're all laying down now. We know there was a painting done in the 17th century that had, I can't remember now, was it either 16 or 17 stones? And there's now definitely 18 there. And there are also some in the hedgerows nearby, which may or may not have been moved in or out. We also have a theory, though, that the long barrow on Tennant's Hill used to have stones. And when we excavated, it did look like there were some possible stone sockets. And one theory is that those stones were taken, and that's what the stone circle was built from.
Oh, I see.
Because it would be quite unusual for there not to be a long barrow in such close proximity to large sarsen stones for them not to have been incorporated. You know, you see long barrows elsewhere that are completely made out of earth or turf or wood, and that's when, you know, the resource wasn't around. But being so close to the value stones, it would seem a little bit odd not to have incorporated them when it was built. And the fact that trackway looks like it goes across the long barrow, we do think, yes, at some point they decided to decommission it, flatten it, change it, alter it, and that's when the stone circle was created. I mean, there is no way of proving that those stones came from one place to the other, but the timelines match up. It's quite nice. It's quite a nice theory.
Yeah.
Just coming back to the Grey Mare and Colts, that's quite a compact site with the stones. They're really quite well. In fact, they're over the top of each other in cases. How do you do a resistivity survey in that sort of environment?
Carefully. If I just go back to share my screen. Then go back to show you that image again. You can see, if you look at, say, it's easiest to see on image A on the right hand side, the grayscale image, you can actually see there are quite a lot of gaps in the survey. These little kind of squares that are the same as the background color, that's where we just couldn't get the probes at all. So you have to sort of stop and do what we call dummy logs. So you don't actually take readings where the stones are. You have to kind of work your way around them. It's very fiddly, and you spend quite a lot of time with your tape measures trying to work out where you're supposed to be. But it all adds to the challenge, doesn't it? It all adds to the excitement and the fun of doing it. It's not straightforward.
The spacing of the probes on the resistivity equipment is what, 2.5 feet, something like that, or what's that? 700 mil. Anyway,
they're a meter apart from each other.
They're a meter.
Yeah.
So to get those two in together must be quite a challenge.
Yeah, it can be. It can be, and it can also be a challenge if the ground's really compact. So if it's been really hot and dry. I've had to do surveys before where you literally have to stand on the frame every time you do it to make sure both probes are in the ground. And as you do it, for those of you coming on Tuesday, I'll show you much more so you can see the resistivity meter and you can see what the equipment's showing you. But you have to look at the reading it's giving, because sometimes if you just touch the ground with the probes, it will record a reading, but actually that's not an accurate reading. You need it to go deeper in. So that's partly why the method can be really, really slow, because you can't just mindlessly walk across the field. You have to sort of pay attention to what you're doing. And I'm sure Lucy can remember having to jam those probes into the ground to get them in a decent enough way to guarantee a good reading. It's a nightmare if you're trying to do it in a stony field. I've done it in places where, you know, you're in a ploughed field, so it should be nice and easy, but you have to pick it up and move it just by a centimetre or two to try and make sure both probes are in the ground. And sometimes you can't do it. It's a bit like the magnetometry. If you've got a metal fence running along the side of your site, you just can't get too close to that metal fence, because it will pick up that metal, which will just camouflage anything that's under the ground. So you might as well not bother. All these methods have their own limitations. Even magnetometry, sometimes if you're underneath power lines, that can give you an issue. So that's what, you know, that's why we use both methods in different ways. Yeah.
So can I ask, how long does it take to process all the data?
How long's a piece of string?
In the same.
So
can you do it in the same day, or? Yeah,
normally you can. So actually, if you're coming on Tuesday, what we'll do is I'll start to talk you through a bit about the detail of, you know, we'll have the machine there. I'll show you what it looks like. I'll show you how to set it up, and we'll look at the processing. So to download the data off the machine onto your computer takes a few minutes. you can get some quite good results quite quickly. You can look at the images quite quickly and you can play around. It doesn't usually take that long in terms of clicking the buttons and making the computer do what you want it to do. What I find takes the time is I want to look at an image and then I need to go away and think about it. Because when you think, well, maybe what I need to go and do is process out, I want to emphasize this bit. So on the grey mare, yeah, if we go back to image C, you can kind of almost see to the south of the grey mare, there's almost like a circle coming through here. And at one point I was trying to almost cut this out because we had such strong readings of the stone on the grey mare. It meant that, in fact, if you look at A, you can see the rest of the site just looks really uniform. It wasn't uniform once you remove those really strong readings. So I find that you can look at the results and you think you know what's going on, but then actually to go away and have a think about it and come back to it again is what takes the time.
In fact, on A, it looks like you've got a square platform to the right centre of that.
It does a bit, doesn't it? I did think that. Yeah, it may well be that. And this is also where on the magnetometry we were starting to see a couple of pips coming through as well. Anne is our Neolithic expert. She did get quite excited about that to start with, and then cooled off a bit. So let's just say, let's watch this space.
Yeah.
On that, it does look interesting, but let's watch this space. Now, sorry, I think someone else was gonna ask a question, but I didn't get a chance to see who it was. Anyone else want to say anything? Feel free to raise your hand or put something in the chat if you don't want to speak up. That's not a problem. I should be able to see it now. No. Okay. Well, hopefully, I'll see quite a few of you on Tuesday in the History Centre for sort of a hands-on session where I'll have the software and we can start to look at some real data. And then we can head out into the field on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, for those of you who can make it. For those of you who can't, let me just stop sharing just for this last bit. For those of you who can't make it, there will be other chances, so don't worry. I will upload this video as soon as I can. It takes Google quite a while to process as it go back to me. And I'll send around the slides as well, so you can feel free to go over this as much as you want. And hopefully on Tuesday we'll have a second complimentary session, because I'm sure you'll end up with thinking about questions between now and then. Write them down, come and ask me, and we'll see how we go. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
For listening to